3, hit it!
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to today's episode of Caffeine for the Soul. We've got new videos going out pretty much every week right now on our YouTube channel, and there's a particular video that's been climbing up the charts, and it's a video of a live presentation I made in Portland a couple of months back called The Only Thing You Need to Know to Change Your Life Forever. And if you enjoy the things we talk about in this show, I highly recommend you check out that video. Now, today, what I wanted to talk about was something that has been an incredibly powerful, I would actually say game-changing distinction in my own life over the last few months. And I called it a whole new way of thinking about ego because it's a whole new way of thinking about ego, at least for me. And it actually started a few years back. I had a conversation with a friend, Mara Gleason Olson, and she is one of the co-founders and leaders of a nonprofit in Chicago that works with the gang kids called One Solution Global. And she was talking about how she made the leap from being a corporate consultant to starting the nonprofit with her husband, Eric. And she said, for years, she had a master's degree in social work, and she's always been very concerned with the state of the world. And she was watching yet another show about yet more violence in the inner cities. And she said to her husband, she said, one day people will understand who they really are and how their minds work. And this kind of violence will be a thing of the past, someday. And her husband just said, someday is just a thought. And that affected her. That made her realize that she sort of had made up that this was something that could only happen somewhere out into the future. But she noticed that over the next 6 months, she really didn't do anything about it. And she was sort of puzzling about why she wasn't taking action, why she wasn't moving forward. And she suddenly realized that she didn't want people to think that she thought she could solve this problem that the wisest people in the world have been concerned with for thousands of years. And then she said to me, and then I realized that was just my ego. And that puzzled me because that didn't sound like ego, that sounded like humility. And she said, no, my concern was with how people would think of me. I didn't want them to think about me a certain way. I didn't want to think about myself a certain way. And that's the definition of ego. Now that landed for me, but it didn't change much. And then a few months ago, I was exploring the notion of arrogance and humility. And those of you who follow me know that my favorite quote about humility comes from the Scottish mystic Sid Banks, when he said, humility isn't thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. So humility, I kind of felt like, okay, I got a pretty good relationship with humility, but I realized in exploring arrogance that for me, not only did I have arrogance and ego completely connected, they were synonymous, but that arrogance was worse than murder. like I would forgive myself sooner for murdering someone, because I would probably have had a very good reason, than I could forgive myself for being arrogant. There's a story that I love about a football player in the 1950s who played for Georgia Tech, who was an incredible football player, but also, had been raised very Christian, very humble. And he was called on to testify in a trial. And so they put him under oath, and, he was a friendly witness. So the DA was sort of just kind of trying to establish his credibility for the trial, and said to him, now, sir, thank you for being with us. I understand you're a football player. And he said, yes, ma'am, I am. And she said, oh, what position do you play? He said, I'm a running back. And she said, are you any good? He said, ma'am, I'm the best in the world. And everyone in the courtroom kind of took a breath. And afterwards, his coach, who had been in the courtroom to kind of look after him, said, John, I was really surprised to hear you say you're the best in the world. You're normally so humble. And he looked embarrassed and said, what was I supposed to do, coach? I was under oath. And there's something about seeing that ego is not arrogance. Ego is our image of self. It's our way of seeing ourselves. It's the way we like to see ourselves. It's the way we like ourselves to be seen. It is an image, as the Scottish mystic Sid Banks said, of self-importance. And I really kind of got it for the first time when I came across this quote from Sid. If you drop your ego, your image of self-importance, and simply be you, just you, whoever you are, you'll find the secret to heaven here on earth. And then later, it's from a recording he did called The Missing Link. Later in the recording, he's talking about that same thing, about just dropping the image. Stop playing to how you're seen, how you're seeing yourself, how other people are seeing you. Like Mara saw that she didn't want people to see her a certain way. So it was the ego that was getting in her way. So Sid goes on to say, dropping your ego, it lets you realize the simplicity of life. It lets you realize that you're not who you think you are. You're something nicer, far better, really nice. And that's something that I can honestly say has been life-changing for me. And I want to propose a little experiment in case just the words aren't doing for you what they somehow did for me. And that experiment is just, and you can do it for a day, you can do it for a week, you can do it for as long as you like. Anytime you notice in the next, let's say you're doing it for a week, anytime you notice in the next week that you are doing or not doing something because you're concerned about how it will appear, there's not because you know to do it or you know not to do it, but because you're concerned about what people might think or what you might think about yourself if you do it or say it. Just drop it as best you can and simply be you. Just you, whoever you are. And you might just find the experience of heaven here on earth. Have fun, learn heaps, happy exploring, and I'll talk with you soon.